Hello, I'm Fraser Myers, Deputy Editor of Spiked, and I'm delighted to be joined down the line by Andrew Fox, former officer in the British Army and Associate Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Andrew, we're speaking in several days after Israel's attack on Iran. Israel has attacked several military sites, has managed to take out several generals and other military targets. Could you, first of all, just give us a sense of the scale and the sophistication of this attack?
Yeah, so it's obviously been a very long time in the planning. This is something that certainly has been Bibi's career goal, I think, for almost his entire time in politics. And he finally got the green light after Mr. Trump's 60-day deadline expired last Thursday. The first and most notable thing was the extent to which Israel has clearly penetrated Iran's apparatus at every level. If we look at the way that Mossad not only conducted targeted assassinations, but also built a fleet of drones inside Iran itself and was then able to deploy them effectively and capture it on video and release it with a concurrent information campaign. It was a truly slick piece of operation, and it's it had its echoes in what Ukraine did a few weeks ago in Russia, but this was dialed up to 11. Truly astonishing. The first wave of strikes that we saw go in targeted personnel, nuclear scientists, senior generals, chief of their general staff, chief of the IRGC, and it was the subsequent waves that then targeted infrastructure. Obviously, the stated aim of the operation was to destroy Iran's nuclear capability. And there's a sort of fundamental kind of flaw in that, and Israel doesn't actually really have the capability to do that. There's sort of munition types and aircraft types they don't have, which means they won't hit the really big underground sites. And so I think we can infer actually that an implicit plan here is some degree of regime change. And that's matched by the rhetoric coming from Bibi. And I think it's possible Israel has made the calculus that the best way to stop the Iranian regime from having nukes is to get rid of the Iranian regime rather than the nukes themselves.
And could you, why do you think this has happened now? Is there anything in particular what was Israel responding to? Because it's often said, you'll hear online, that this was a completely unprovoked attack against an entirely blameless regime.
I know those poor sweet innocent lambs in Tehran. This is the logical end state to the war that Israel's been fighting since 7th of October. The Iranian strategy for a long time has been to ring around Israel with these 7 proxies, or 6 proxies and Iran itself. I think there's a fundamental failure to understand what on earth is going on in the Middle East if you think that this is an unprovoked escalation, because Iran has been attacking Israel endlessly. And on top of that, they've nakedly said that they want to delete Israel off the map. And so I don't think there are many other countries on earth in that situation that wouldn't have taken some kind of military action. But why now specifically? I think Israel would have gone sooner if Mr. Trump hadn't asked for that 60-day window to try and make one of his famous deals. I think I think even now the White House would prefer this to end with a deal. Everything coming out of the White House is pointing that way in what Trump is saying. It also takes time to prepare. And I think probably the preparations for this really spun up as soon as the American presidential election results were in. I don't think this would have happened under Biden. But as soon as they got Trump in, they knew that they were going to get a green flag. And certainly he's appointed the most pro-Israel White House administration in history. And really, it's a matter of the stars aligning, especially given how weakened Iran was due to Israel's 2 previous attacks in 2024. There was a huge amount of air defenses destroyed and strategic missile capability degraded. So it's kind of, if not now, then when, is probably the best answer.
And you mentioned regime change earlier as being a possible goal of the Israeli state. I mean, how likely is that? I mean, because it's not just the military's been degraded, but there have been many protests. There's clearly a restive population, domestic population in Iran that would like to see the back of this regime as well.
I mean, is it likely? I mean, it's probably not into the category of likely yet, but it's less unlikely than it was probably at any time in the last decade or so. As you say, huge civil unrest. They've had a very cold, hard winter in Iran, where electricity supply has been really poor, even to the extent of main motorways not having their lights being able to be turned on, and people are feeling that. The flip side of this, of course, is that there's a lot of entrenched interests in that kind of bazaar class, if you want to call it that, the kind of industrial sector, whose priorities will be their own pockets rather than loyalty to any particular regime or other. And it's really until they cleave away from the current regime, we're probably not going to see a huge amount of movement. And the other issue, of course, is that the opposition groups are so disparate and poorly organised. They don't really have a single figure to rally around. Pahlavi is trying to make himself that figure, but there are a lot of people in Iran that don't like him very much because they remember some of the unpleasant things that went on under his father's rule. So there's a lot of factors that need to play into this. We can categorize it in three sort of effects. So military, social, and psychological. This is a sort of a well-recognized pattern when it comes to regimes falling. On the military side, Israel is degrading that capability, but we're not seeing any signs yet of military changing sides or declaring against the regime or military coup or anything like that. So that's not quite there yet, but we've seen progress. On the social side, there is unrest, but we aren't yet seeing people taking to the streets. There are videos around of people chanting "Death to Khamenei," but I don't think we're at the tipping point yet for that to spill into something meaningful. And then the psychological effect will be something like a major regime figure, be it the supreme leader or president, either dying or fleeing, and then that will be the trigger for the whole thing to fall apart. But we're on the journey towards it, but we're not there yet.
And of course, Israel has been very successful in degrading a lot of Iran's military, but it does still have quite a formidable sort of size of ground troops and things like that. It would be premature, would it not, to say that this is a full defeat or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Iran has 500,000 men under arms. It's not a very good military, but it's a very large one. And the Israeli Air Force is actually comparatively small. So the number of targets they can strike in each wave is not huge. I've seen a variety of estimates over the weekend, but as low as 20% of the nuclear capability is what they assess has been destroyed so far. And particularly with the Fordo site, which is the one that's buried half a mile under a mountain near Coms, Israel simply cannot strike that from the air. I mean, they can hit it, but they won't penetrate to that depth. They've got two options, effectively, or three, if you include getting the Americans to do the job for them, because the Americans do have that munition, the MOP, the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, which is a huge beast that probably could strike that target, but there's no sign yet that America's going to weigh in. So the other two options are you either pick a spot on the ground and just hit it repeatedly and effectively dig it out with missiles, which is hugely costly and has no guarantee of success, or you try a commando raid or a special forces raid or similar. But when you look at that target with a professional eye, that's not a mission I would want to try. The Israelis have done similar in Syria. They've attacked a mountain underground base at range and very successfully got on and off the ground in 2 hours with 0 casualties and the mission completed. So Israel does have a really impressive capability, but this is another level of challenge to what they did in Syria. So we can't call it a victory. We can't even say even if we frame it in terms of strategic goals achieved, they haven't achieved that yet. And there are question marks over whether they will or not.
And of course, you probably will have seen that there have been protests against the Israeli strikes. Is there anything that Israel does that wouldn't be met with a protest by people in the UK, by Westerners? Because it seems that these strikes really are precise, and they are clearly not affecting large numbers of civilians or any of the other criticisms that people might make of Israel's conduct elsewhere.
Especially in the context of the fact that Iran's strikes on Israel are targeting civilians, and then they haven't hit any military targets, and the only people that have died have been innocent Israelis. And yet people wave Iranian flags in London, and it's staggering. And I think it shows the scale of the disinformation campaign, the information warfare that's taken place since 7th of October. In terms of scope and achievement, I don't think we've ever seen a better information campaign from a purely objective view. They've done an incredible job of persuading people that October the 7th wasn't that bad, that Israel is targeting civilians in Gaza, that, there are war crimes as a matter of policy, that there's genocide even. I mean, these things are demonstrably untrue, and yet that is the dominant narrative when it comes to the war in Gaza, particularly. And it goes back to that Iranian, Qatari, Russian, Pakistani-driven information campaign that has just flooded social media in a way that Israel could never reply to, just because of the scale of the thing and the money that's been put behind it. But it also shows the ignorance, I think, of these people who are taking very strong views on a conflict they really don't know anything about or understand. Because Iran, by any metric, is an enemy of the UK. They've tried to assassinate people on our soil. They've killed police officers. You know, people remember the SAS raid in the 80s on the Iranian embassy where they were taking hostages. You know, they are a monstrous regime. They funded an armed Hezbollah, who are people smuggling global narco traffickers. And to see that flag waved on British streets really does show the depths of stupidity and ignorance that people fall prey to in the social media age, where they don't have the facility to check the information that's flooding over their phone screens.
And do you worry about the UK's sort of weakening or sort of faltering support for Israel? I mean, we have said that we would defend them from an Iranian retaliation, but there was a lot of hesitation over that. We learned that Israel didn't share details about the strike with the British government. What's your take on that aspect of things?
I mean, it's deeply indicative of an Israel that no longer sees the UK as an ally, which is a really sad place to be, I think, given how much we've cooperated on anti-extremism intelligence over the years. And you know, I had a meeting with Bibi earlier last year, and when David Lammy's name came up in conversation, he kind of just gave a contemptuous smirk. It was really really indicative of the way Jerusalem now sees London. And I think, you know, if you look at what Labour have done since they've been in power, they've essentially burned every scrap of influence we had in Jerusalem by refunding UNRWA, by dropping opposition to the ICC cases against Bibi and Gallant, by halting some arms sales, by sanctioning Israeli government ministers, and obviously not sanctioning other far worse people around the world. Any chance that the UK had to influence how the campaign in the Middle East was going to go is now a thing of the past. I think Labour are running scared of their own electorates. I think they are still wounded by losing seats to pro-Gaza MPs in the last general election, particularly in Leicester South. I think that one really hurt them as they lost a potential cabinet minister. And I think, you know, while Labour is prioritising their domestic voter base over the UK's national interest, I don't see that the UK is going to have any role to play in what's happening in the Middle East.
And obviously, most Middle Eastern countries have condemned Israel's strikes on Iran, but you suspect some of them are actually privately quite relieved or even pleased by this.
Yeah, I think this is very much a sort of PR campaign by them. There's two sides to the coin here, because these Arab states know how malign and how potentially damaging Iran is to the region. You know, they are the sort of the foundation of a huge amount of this sort of lack of stability that we've seen around, particularly, you know, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria. This is all Iranian fingerprints all over it, and they know that. And I think in private they will be popping champagne corks at the chance that that regime might be fatally damaged. They will be cautious in some ways, because they know that the worst outcome for what Israel is doing in Iran is that Iran leaves the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and makes a rush for a bomb, because Israel hasn't successfully taken out Fordo, and they will be left with that capability to do that. So that there is a worst case scenario here, that it's really bad news for the Gulf states. And the other factor they have to consider, of course, is their own populations. Particularly in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman is driving his liberalization agenda. He needs to bring the people with him on that. And at the moment, due to that information campaign we referenced earlier, that population hates Israel and thinks they're committing a genocide. You know, if you go on any Arab TV channel, the genocide in Gaza is spoken about as if it was just a thing. It's a fact. It's not under any question. Egyptian TV in particular is really bad for that. Of course, Al Jazeera Arabic, and they're all pushing the same narrative. So there's a balance to be struck for the Gulf states, and it's far more sensible in public to condemn Israel than it is to support what they're doing.
And finally, is there anything missing from the conversation or from the debate that you think needs to be injected into the public conversation to make it so people have a better understanding of all this?
Yeah, I think there's a framing issue here, because some of the ways this is being presented is if it's somehow a tit for tat and there's kind of a parity in what's going on each side. And I think we need to be really honest and say that everyone knew before this started that Israel's missile defenses were about 90% effective. Nobody ever said that every single missile coming Israel's way was going to be shot down. And the Israelis were open that they did expect missiles to come through, and they do expect missiles to land. That doesn't change the fact this is a staggeringly one-way battering at the moment, as far as this war is going. Iran is taking hit after hit. The best explanation for that first wave would be it'd be like before D-Day, and managing to take out every top German general and kill Rommel and everyone else before even the first boat hit the shore. That's the scale of the Israeli achievement. The really big question, of course, is if they can follow through with those initial gains and actually have a meaningful strategic success at the end of it.
Andrew Fox, thank you very much.
Thank you.